It all started when Ben decided, without any discussion, that we would move in with his parents. That was the final straw for me, but in truth, this had been building for years. From the beginning, Ben had a habit of making decisions without involving me, as if my thoughts and feelings didn't matter. When he first suggested we move in with his parents, I was shocked. He didn't ask for my opinion. He didn't even discuss the logistics. It was just assumed that I would fall in line. This kind of behavior wasn't new for Ben. Throughout our marriage, he had always done what he wanted, often disregarding my needs. And now, without even asking, he had packed his parents' belongings to move into our home. My home, which I had inherited from my family. I felt trapped, but little did he know, I was already planning my escape. As I opened the boxes during our move, I found myself staring at my mother-in-law's clothes, folded neatly as if she was already living with us. My heart pounded as anger surged through me. This was the house I had renovated using my inheritance, the house where I had hoped to start fresh, far from Ben's overbearing family. I immediately called him to demand answers. "What's all this?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Ben responded casually, as if it was no big deal, telling me his parents were moving in with us. I was stunned. How could he make such a monumental decision without even consulting me? I argued, but Ben was resolute. "If you don't like it, sign the divorce papers," he snapped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. His words echoed in my mind as he continued, "But how will you survive without me?" "You're just a housewife." That was the moment I realized I couldn't let him control me any longer. Ben left for a vacation the next day, leaving me alone to deal with the mess of unpacking and settling in his parents' belongings. But instead of following his orders, I reached out to the one person who had always supported me in secret. His father, Henry. Henry was a quiet, dignified man who had often expressed his disapproval of his wife Diane's constant meddling. Over the years, he had defended me, especially when Diane tried to impose her controlling ways on our lives. I called him, explaining the situation. Without hesitation, Henry offered to help. He too was fed up with Diane's demands and Ben's selfishness. Together, we arranged for movers to take all of Diane's belongings to a different location. Henry assured me that everything would be handled discreetly. With his help, I felt a surge of confidence. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my life. As Ben enjoyed his luxurious vacation with his parents, unaware of the storm brewing back home, I began making my own plans. Henry and I worked quickly to remove every trace of Diane from my house. I also took the bold step of selling the house. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was the only way to fully free myself from Ben's control. The house was mine, inherited from my parents, and with Aaron's help, I found a buyer almost immediately. Aaron, my son, had been distant from Ben for years. He had grown tired of his father's controlling nature and had often expressed frustration at how Ben treated me. When I told him my plan to sell the house and move on, Aaron didn't hesitate to support me. He even helped me find a beautiful high-rise condo where I could start over. As the days passed, I felt a sense of empowerment that I hadn't experienced in years. I was finally in control of my future. A week after Ben left, the sale of the house was finalized. I moved into my new condo, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt free. The high-rise apartment was modern, spacious, and far removed from the chaos of my old life. Aaron visited frequently, helping me settle in and providing emotional support. He had grown into a responsible, caring young man, traits I had nurtured in him, despite Ben's efforts to spoil and manipulate him. Aaron had seen through his father's behavior long ago, and now he was fully on my side. As I unpacked in my new home, I thought about the years I had spent trapped in a marriage where my opinions were dismissed and my independence stripped away. But now, I was starting over. The next morning, just as I was enjoying a cup of coffee, my phone rang. It was Ben, and from the tone of his voice, I knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. "Where's the house? Where's all our stuff?" Ben's voice was frantic. He had returned from his vacation to find an empty shell where our home once stood. I smiled to myself, knowing he was about to realize just how much had changed. For details, You'll have to ask your father, I replied calmly. The silence on the other end of the line was palpable. Ben sputtered in disbelief before finally shouting, "You can't do this. That's our house." I reminded him that the house was mine, inherited from my parents, and that I had every right to sell it. His anger flared, but there was nothing he could do. Legally, he had no claim to the house, and he knew it. "You never listen, Ben. You've been making decisions for me for years, and now you're facing the consequences," I said, hanging up before he could argue further. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. For the first time in a long while, I felt powerful. A few days later, I received a call from Henry. He apologized profusely for not being able to stop Ben and Diane's actions earlier. "I've tried to reason with them for years," he said, his voice heavy with regret. He then revealed that Diane was furious. She had borrowed a spare key from Ben and entered the house while I was still moving out, only to find that all her belongings were gone. "She's threatening to sue," Henry said, but there was a note of amusement in his voice. We both knew that Diane had no legal standing. In fact, the real issue was that she had entered my house without permission. I chuckled, feeling a sense of justice. Diane had tormented me for years, and now she was facing the consequences of her own arrogance. Henry reassured me that he would handle things, and for once I believed him. He was tired of his wife's antics and was ready to stand up to her. Meanwhile, Aaron was by my side throughout the entire ordeal. We had grown closer since Ben had become increasingly distant, focusing all his attention on his parents. Aaron had witnessed the way his father treated me and had quietly formed his own opinions. He was no longer the boy who idolized Ben. In fact, Aaron had become my greatest support, offering practical help and emotional strength as I rebuilt my life. One evening, as we sat together in my new condo, Aaron opened up about his frustrations with his father. "Dad never listened, Mom," he said, shaking his head. "Even when I tried to talk to him about school or my future, he brushed me off. All he cared about was impressing Grandma and buying her things." I nodded, knowing all too well how Ben's obsession with pleasing his mother had overshadowed everything else. Aaron continued, "I don't want to be like him, Mom. I want to be someone who listens, someone who cares." His words filled me with pride. As the days passed, Ben's life began to unravel. Without the house and the financial support I had quietly been providing, he struggled to maintain the lifestyle he and his mother had grown accustomed to. The remittances Aaron had been sending were no longer available, as Aaron had cut ties with his father completely. Aaron revealed to me that the money he had sent to help me had been siphoned off by Ben and passed directly to Diane. I was stunned. I had always suspected that Ben was giving Diane more than we could afford, but to take money from his own son, that was unforgivable. Aaron was livid, and for the first time, I saw the depth of his anger toward his father. "I'm done with him," Aaron declared, his voice firm. "He's made his choices, and now he has to live with them." I knew then that the bond between Ben and Aaron was irreparably broken. As for Diane, she was no longer the powerful figure she once was. After years of wasteful spending, she found herself living in a modest apartment with Ben. Their luxurious lifestyle had crumbled. Henry, fed up with her demands, had initiated divorce proceedings. He had long grown tired of her manipulation and had decided to cut her off financially. Diane, who had always relied on her husband and son to fund her extravagant habits, was now facing the harsh reality of living on a tight budget. She tried to cling to Henry, begging him to reconsider, but he was resolute. "I've had enough," he told me during one of our conversations. "She's taken everything from me, and now it's time for her to face the consequences." Ben, who had once been so proud and defiant, was now struggling to keep up with the bills. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had spent years controlling me, but now he was the one trapped in a life he couldn't escape. One day, out of the blue, Ben called me again. His voice was different this time, tired, defeated. "I need your help," he said. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The man who had once dismissed me as just a housewife was now begging for my assistance. "We're struggling, Cindy. Mom's not well, and I'm barely getting by. I listened quietly, letting him explain the mess he had created. He was drowning in debt, and Diane's medical bills were piling up. But as much as part of me wanted to feel sympathy, I couldn't forget the years of mistreatment. "You're not my husband anymore, Ben," I reminded him calmly. "We're divorced, remember?" His silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. Ben had never expected me to go through with the divorce, but I had. I had filed the papers the same day he'd left for his vacation, ensuring that our marriage was officially over. "You made your choices, Ben. Now you have to live with them," I said, hanging up for the last time. In the years that followed, life for Aaron and me flourished. He continued to thrive in his career, and I found joy in the freedom that came with my new life. Aaron and his fiancée visited often, bringing their baby daughter, who had quickly become the light of my life. The joy of watching my son grow into a man who was kind, compassionate, and thoughtful filled me with pride. Meanwhile, Ben and Diane faded from our lives. I no longer knew what became of them, and frankly, I didn't care. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. As I sat in my high-rise condo, watching the sun set over the city, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in years, I was free from the control, the manipulation, and the pain. And as I looked forward to the future, I knew one thing for sure: I would never let anyone take my freedom away.